Hi guys, my name's Barry and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be ranking all the Evil Dead movies. There only is 5 in the movie franchise. I won't be including Ash vs the Evil Dead for 2 reasons. 1, it's a TV show, and 2, I haven't seen it all yet, so I couldn't really judge because I haven't seen it all. So it's just going to be the 5 movies today. Now, I will be honest guys, this is the hardest ranking of any horror franchise that I've ever ranked in my life, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree with that. I once had each Evil Dead movie at the top of the list before, and I've also had my best movie at the bottom before. That's how close this is. This has to be the closest of any franchise that I've ever ranked, because each movie individually could be the worst and it also could be the best. And thankfully, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree with this as well, is that no matter whose list you look at, they'll have great reasons for each movie being top of the list, and I'm sure you will see that. I'm sure you will see channels with Evil Dead 1 as number 1, you'll see Evil Dead 2 as number 1, Army of Darkness is number 1, the remake is number 1, reboot, and Evil Dead Rise as number 1. Every movie will be the top of someone's list, and those movies at the top will be in someone's bottom. But I don't think there is a bad film in the franchise. Similar to Scream, only in this one, the worst movie in the franchise is absolutely great, and the best movie in the franchise is absolutely great. That's how close this is. But without further ado guys, let's do the worst, the worst to the best. And at number 5 is the original The Evil Dead from 1981. It was almost a perfect film. That's how really good this film was. It wasn't the best, but it was a great film. The practical effects were ahead of its time. The storytelling was ahead of its time. It didn't really have the right to be as good as it was, because back in the day, I know that Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell were just making films like for fun, like Within the Woods in 1978. They were able to get some sort of a money back for that in order to create The Evil Dead, and the rest is history. But it is a great film. I think the only thing that maybe puts it in last place is it does look dated. When you watch it, you know it's a very dated film. There are other films in this franchise that don't look as dated as this, but the story's great. The idea of the film is great. The acting's really good for 1981. I think the only thing that puts this in last place for me is the fact that it does look the most outdated one. That's obvious because it is the oldest one in the franchise, but that's my only reason. It might be a bad reason, but I had to give you some reason. And at number 4 is Army of Darkness, Evil Dead 3. Now this is a film that has been at the top of my list many times. In fact, it's probably been at the top of my list the longest out of any Evil Dead film. But I had to watch them all again, and from what I'm deciding right now, it's in 4th place, but it's still a great film. I think it's when the franchise took a turn, not for the worst, but a turn for the difference, in the case that it went from scary to funny scary, to maybe slapstick funny scary for part 3 obviously. So yeah, it's a fun film. This was the first Evil Dead movie I had ever seen, and I think it's the same with a lot of people, because it is that entry level, that gateway to horror that a lot of people take. That's the journey a lot of people go on. Some people didn't even know it was an Evil Dead film, even though we got the recap at the beginning, and I didn't know it was an Evil Dead film. I didn't even know what Evil Dead was when I first watched it. We watched it as a family film. The whole family sat down and thought, this looks funny, let's watch it. And it was funny. It was more funny than horror. But as I got older and I realised this was a sequel to previous movies, then I got round to watching the other films. But I still kind of loved Army of Darkness more because it was the first that I watched. So I had to try and, being a critic now, or what I call myself a critic, I have to try and separate my nostalgia and look at things from a different perspective. And yes, I loved it more as a kid, but I still love it today because it's a fun ride, and even if you watch it on its own without looking at it as an Evil Dead film, you're still going to have fun. So I think people will probably see Army of Darkness as the most fun in the franchise, but to me at this moment in time it's just not the best. But 4th place, it's still good. And at number 3 is Evil Dead Rise. Now I did just do a review for this and a spoiler review, so you kind of know my thoughts on the movie, but I would call it the middle of the road in the Evil Dead franchise, and that is a fantastic thing to be called, because like I said, every film is great in the franchise. Now I was toying with the idea of putting it 2nd place, I was toying with the idea of putting it 4th place. I definitely didn't want to put it in last place because it's not the worst, even though they're all great. I have to keep reiterating that, guys. I wouldn't say it was the worst in a great franchise, but I also wouldn't say it's the best in a great franchise. So I felt like it was only right to put it in the middle because it is a great film at the end of the day. Yes, it's different. It takes you away from that cabin. It takes you away from the way we see all the Evil Dead films. Even though Army of Darkness didn't really take place in a cabin, we kind of most associate Evil Dead with cabins, and although we did get a cabin in it, they decided to change it up. And I think it was a good idea to change it up because you don't want to continually keep it in this one cabin. Yes, that is a good idea. It's like taking Michael Myers out of Haddonfield. It's like taking Ghostface out of Woodsboro. It's like taking Jason Voorhees out of Camp Crystal Lake. It can work if you give it a good story, and that's exactly what they did with Evil Dead Rise. They took the risk, they took it out of the cabin, but they gave us a good story to back it up, and I think it was a fantastic film. And at number 2 is Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. This was a whirlwind of a movie when I first saw it, because I did watch the original first and I thought, that's a great film, absolutely love it. And then when I watched Evil Dead 2, I've said this before, it's just like a remake of Evil Dead, only with a bigger budget and the cast being more experienced, in the likes of Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi, the director, having a more experienced understanding of directing a horror film. So they could only improve on what they'd done before. They gave us the same beats but give us something a little bit different at the same time. And I know, yes, you would maybe call Evil Dead 2, the first half of it a recap, and then the second half of it something different. You can call it whatever you want. All I can say is it's an amazing horror film, and even though it's got some more slapstick comedy in it than the original, it's still quite scary. Even today watching it, you're like, do you know that's quite scary? Some elements of it does scare even adults today. So yeah, it's a great film. I think they upped the ante on everything that they've done with Evil Dead, the first one. I don't think I've ever preferred the first movie over the second film. I think the second one's always been my favourite out of the two. But they do kind of change around the ranking every now and again. But one thing's for certain is Evil Dead 2 has always been and will always be, to me, better than the original. And at number 1 is of course Evil Dead from 2013. You can call it a reboot, you can call it a prequel, a sequel, a remake, whatever you want to call it. It is what it is, and that's all I can really say. I wasn't expecting much from Evil Dead from 2013, and in fact when the movie was announced, it came at a time where remakes were starting to dwindle down a little bit, and any remake that was getting announced back in 2012, 2013, people were just brushing it off, saying, I'm never going to watch it, I'm sick of remakes, I'm sick of whatever this is, I'm just not going to watch it. Especially with movies like Evil Dead, because you get your movies like Evil Dead, The Exorcist, The Wizard of Oz, Back to the Future, The Godfather. These are films that a lot of people from back in the day, when they came out, would never want to see a remake of. Like for me, I wouldn't want to see a remake of The Faculty. I wouldn't want to see a remake of Scream. So I can understand how these people feel that we're getting remakes of movies that they enjoyed when they were younger. So I can understand the hatred towards films, especially movies like Evil Dead. But with everything, I give it a chance, whether I think it looks good or not. And I gave Evil Dead 2013 a chance, thinking nothing of it, because the last movie we got in the franchise was more slapstick comedy in Army of Darkness than horror. But when I saw the trailer for it, it intrigued me because it did look different in tone to Army of Darkness, but more in tone to the original from 1981. So that's what intrigued me to begin with. But when I went to see the film, and I shit you not guys, I still remember it to this day because it was just over 10 years ago now, my wife felt physically sick while watching the film. I actually did feel a little bit queasy when I watched it because it is balls to the wall disgustingly great. It's one of the most disgusting and disturbing movies I've ever seen, and that's hard to do as an adult. I mean, 10 years ago I was 29 years old, and I thought back then, nothing's going to disturb me ever again. I've seen it all. I've seen Saw, Hostel, etc., the torture porn series and movies, so nothing was really going to faze me. And although Evil Dead is not torture porn, it's definitely not, I think the gore and the brutality in Evil Dead was necessary. It wasn't just put there to shock. It did shock, but it was necessary shock because Evil Dead is supposed to be like that. They gave us the equivalent of what we got in 1981 because that disturbed and shocked people in 1981, but you show someone that movie today, they would laugh at it. So you need to give them the equivalent, and I think Evil Dead from 2013 is the ultimate equivalent and more, because not only did we get the shock factor that was necessary, we've got fantastic acting, we get a really good storyline that kind of helped keep them at the cabin with the whole Mia being addicted to drugs and have to keep her there. Is she hallucinating? Is she not? Obviously she's not hallucinating, but we need them to believe that so they can stick to the cabin. So everything they gave us was very realistic in an unrealistic setting. I can't fault this film at all. I know that sometimes you have to fault films because there's pros and cons. I don't see a con for Evil Dead 2013. Not only is it the best Evil Dead movie, it's probably the best reboot slash remake that we've ever seen. I don't think any other reboot or remake comes close to Evil Dead from 2013. It is a fantastic film, easily the best Evil Dead movie in the franchise for me. So what are your thoughts on that, guys? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I don't mind if you disagree, because any film, I've said it time and time again, any film in this franchise could be the best. All you have to do is tell me why, and that's what I want you to do just now, guys. Leave your list down below. There's only 5. Let me know your best to worst or worst to best and we can discuss it. As always, thanks a lot for watching, thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.
I'll be right back.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Ever played in the cat?
Someone's in the